Now, good afternoon. I welcome you to the City County Commons. If we could get a few talkative individuals to seat themselves, please.
We have,
Okay,
break it up.
break it up. I'm gonna sit between you two.
And I don't know if we have cameras on. Maybe we need to wait for the cameras.
Continue to like to talk.
Move over here, listen. All right, you got time.
Go ask.
This is the most unruly.
Yeah, you need a gavel. Okay, all right.
Okay, now pay that time.
My daughter's birthday is today, and they were sending me.
Are we on?
We have,
Yeah, it's on up there. We just don't see it here.
sound. Okay.
Okay. Again, we've been on the air for a little bit. I again will say that welcome to the June 4th City County Commons meeting. I'm John Camp, and we will convene. And how about if we just everyone quickly mention their name, starting with Ms.
Cindy Lamb, Lincoln City Council.
Jane Raybold, Lincoln City Council.
Roma Amison, Lancaster County Commissioner.
Bill Avery, Commissioner.
Carl Eskridge, City Council.
John Camp, City Council.
Deb Shore, County Board.
Benny Shoab, City Council.
Todd Wilchin, County Board.
Lyrian Gaylor Baird, City Council.
Thank you. And our first item agenda is to approve the common meeting minutes of February 13th.
Move approval.
Second.
Okay, Roma moved and Deb seconded. Any discussions, clarifications, changes? Would you call the roll, please?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird,
Yes.
Eskridge,
Yes.
Raybold,
Abstain?
Lamb,
Yes.
Camp,
Yes.
Shore,
Yes.
Avery,
Yes.
Wilchin,
Yes.
Amundson,
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And our next item on the agenda is the Civil Protective Custody Update with Tammy Stevenson. Why don't you proceed, please?
thank you. Civil protective custody has been in the news lately, and thought it would be a good opportunity to talk to you a little bit about what brought us to this situation and kind of where we're at today. The Bridge Behavioral Health is a licensed substance use treatment center with 68 beds, and the services we provide include civil protective custody, respite programs, medical withdrawal, residential treatment, and outpatient treatment. About 18 months ago, we learned that Medicaid was not paying any of the claims that we were filing for the clients in civil protective custody. As we started to research why that was happening, we learned that there was not a current service definition that Medicaid was willing to pay those claims under. So we started working with them on a new service definition. At the same time, in Omaha, Catholic Charities runs the Civil Protective Custody Program in Omaha, and they decided that they were no longer interested in running that program, and they put their facility up for sale. Centerpoint purchased the residential portion of it, and Douglas County Mental Health came in and purchased the detox and civil protective custody program. As a new agency, they had to apply for a brand new license. When licensure stepped into their facility, they told them they were not eligible to receive a license based on the use of seclusion, which I will explain in just a minute. When that happened, Douglas County Mental Health said, then how is the Bridge doing it in Lincoln? And it started a series of events which has led to today, where we're looking at both an issue regarding our license, as well as a funding issue, not only with Medicaid, but now also with the Division of Behavioral Health. So we have three distinct issues that are on the table. So fast forward, we invited licensure on site into the Bridge because we knew of the concerns that they had in Omaha. And we invited them there. We talked to them about our interpretation of the regulations and how it's been working since 1983 when we first provided these services. And their verbal information to us is that it seems like our license would be in a good position, but we received a letter from licensure last week. And it's not exactly clear, but we are hopeful that our license will be approved here in the next coming months. The Division of Behavioral Health has said, starting now, that they will no longer fund programs that are not accredited. And the Civil Protective Custody Program is not accredited. Every other one of our programs at the Bridge is. And when we first received accreditation back in 2011, we were told that as long as our agency was accredited, the fact that that one particular program was not accredited was okay. Well, that situation has changed, and now the Division of Behavioral Health is telling us that they will no longer pay for a program that's not accredited. So each one of these situations, both the licensing, the funding with the Division of Behavioral Health, and the funding with Medicaid, surround how we operate civil protective custody. In the statute, it says that if a law enforcement finds somebody on public or quasi-public property and they are a danger to themselves or to others because of their level of intoxication, that they can be involuntarily committed for no more than 24 hours in this program in civil protective custody. So law enforcement officers in the city, as well as the county, state patrol, as well as UNLPD, can admit someone into this program, and we monitor them. We have nursing staff who do a nursing assessment, and we monitor them, and our goal is to move them to a least restrictive environment as soon as possible. So either they can go home with a responsible party, and 41% of our clients actually do go home with a responsible party rather than staying the entire time. So if we can find somebody who's sober, who has a driver's license, and is willing to care for them for the next set number of hours that we determine that they would still need care, we will release that person to that responsible party. If they cannot identify a responsible party, or that person is not willing to come pick them up, then they stay in our custody until their BAC is a 0 or until they reach that 24-hour mark. The average stay of clients in civil protective custody is just over 9 hours. So that's the average length of stay. The statute says no more than 24, but in reality, it's a much, much smaller stay. Why we feel it's important to continue to serve these clients is we have that opportunity to intervene. Hopefully we get them to stay on their own accord. Many times they leave when their time is up. But if we can get them to stay and move into that medical withdrawal unit, or talk to them about perhaps scheduling an evaluation so that they can pursue treatment, we are certainly wanting to provide those kind of interventions during their very short time with us. So the issue is about seclusion or locked treatment doors. When the clients are being admitted into civil protective custody, they are not coming there on their free will. They're coming here because law enforcement has already deemed them to be a danger to themselves or others. They are acutely intoxicated. Nearly half of the clients who are admitted have a BAC higher than 0.25. So their behavior is unpredictable. They're often not feeling well, and they certainly don't want to be there because they've been brought in against their will. So the concept of letting them be in an environment where there's not locked doors is not something that our nurse and one tech on staff could handle in that physical sort of situation. So we have them in treatment rooms. Each of the treatment rooms can hold up to 4 people, and they stay in that environment until we know that they're safe to be released or they're safe to go home with a responsible party. But the issue as far as accreditation is that the accrediting bodies for substance use treatment centers believe that seclusion should be used as a last resort and as never as just at the time they're being admitted should they go into a locked treatment room door. Our argument has always been that is absolutely true for all of our other programs. But this particular program deals with people who are acutely intoxicated, whose behavior is unpredictable, often volatile, and combative. So when we met with our accrediting consultant back in 2011, we had long conversations with them about whether or not this program could achieve accreditation. And our consultant said, we appreciate what you're doing here, but this just isn't within the scope of a programs that we accredit. So we have continued to run that program as a licensed program, but not being accredited because of how we lock the door on the treatment room doors to ensure safety for themselves as well as for our staff. The issue now is coming that the division is saying they will not pay for a program that's not accredited. So those is a short summary of the issues that we're dealing with, not only with our license, but the funding issue from the division as well as the funding with the Medicaid. Any questions?
So what is the alternative for these folks that are having contact with law enforcement?
In our conversations with the state, if we would pursue the model that they're suggesting, which would be an unlocked treatment room door, we would have no choice but to limit the number of admissions or limit the kind of admissions that we take into that program. So as we've done research across the state at other programs that are very similar that have an involuntary component, they up front do not take people who are under the influence of drugs. They do not take juveniles, that is the category of clients that we take today. We take 14 through 18, ages 14 through 18. They also will not take anybody who is in the slightest bit volatile or combative. So if we would pursue the model that the state is wanting us to do, we would have to limit the admissions. My staff and I have been studying our clients, and each day as we look at the admissions, we're doing our best to guess who would we let in a program with unlocked doors. Our best guess is about 25% of who we serve today. So we would need to invest the money to remodel the program. We would have to hire 24/7 security, and in the end, serve approximately 25% of who we serve today. The other 75% would likely be sent to jail, and that civil protective program custody would exist in our county jail.
So that's without medical supervision in locked facility.
It would be in a locked facility, which is the ironic part of it all. If we don't serve them, they will still be in a secluded, secured environment, but not getting the interventions that we provide as a substance use treatment center. As far as the medical care, I'll defer to Brad Johnson as to what kind of medical care he would be able to provide those clients.
No sandwiches either. You guys give us sandwiches.
We do give sandwiches. We do.
Ms. Rabel?
Tammy, we know that this issue has been going on for a number of months.
Yes.
And I know that there was some outreach to the Nebraska State Legislature to see
Yes.
if they could change some of the classifications that Medicaid is currently using to include
Yes.
these type of
We-
civil protective cases in custody. What has happened on that issue?
Regarding Medicaid.
Yeah.
We worked with Medicaid for many months to develop a new service definition. And when the licensing issue came about, the service definition kind of got put on hold because then the licensing issue was a little bit more critical. And so once we were continuing to work with the licensing issue, in a conference call in May, the division said, I think we need to bring up the service definition again. We need to look at it. We think we're about 95% there. Let's finalize it. We said, that's great. The division said we were willing to start paying for services as of July 1, but they needed to be accredited. So even though we had worked together on the service definition, now all of a sudden they were requiring that it be accredited. So we did go ahead and move forward with that work group, and we met with the division and Medicaid. But suddenly in that meeting, Medicaid announced they would no longer pay for services that were involuntary. So after having worked with us for months on a new service definition, they announced May 16th that they would not fund this program anymore at all because of the involuntary component,
So would they,
even though that's written in the service definition.
so would they be willing to fund the programs now in the county jails?
Would be a good question.
No, they wouldn't.
No.
I mean, yes.
I was kind of being sarcastic.
Yes.
We got the chief here, he can answer that.
What about, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
What about payment to Bryan Hospital?
I have reached out and talked to Dr. Malinik, and he is quite aware that certainly if we were to close this program or only be able to serve a portion of who we serve today, that many of these clients would end up in the ER. I believe the county jail's policy is that anybody with a .25 and higher would need to be medically cleared. So all of those would end up in the emergency room at Bryan West, possibly other hospitals if the volume got to be too much. And what Dr. Malinik explained to me was that that would be the lowest priority in the emergency room. And because those clients would be under civil protective custody, the officer would need to stay there with them that entire time. Once they're medically cleared, then they would be transported to jail. That's my understanding of how that process could potentially look if we were not able to run the program at the bridge.
So that's, I mean, that's another alternative, another bad alternative, in my opinion. And maybe a third alternative, given the expenditure of resources of LPD and other law enforcement, officers may be inclined not to mess with them. And so you leave them on the streets and they continue to drink, and
That is absolutely our
Bad
concern.
outcomes, yeah.
We would definitely expect, the number of deaths that could arise, the number of cases of exposure and things during the winter months, even in the hot summer months. It could put a lot of people's lives at risk. And, I don't know about you, but I'm not comfortable with that. It's not okay with me.
And then the loss of funding
Yes.
that you've experienced is $150,000 a year, is that right?
At this point, we've only lost Medicaid funding, and that has been typically between $50,000 to $60,000 a year, depending on which clients we have. What is now at risk is about $100,000 from the region, which would be state dollars that would come. We received that money for fiscal year 18, but they're telling us as of July 1, we would need to be accredited in order to receive that. So after July 1, we're looking at between $150,000 to $160,000 in lost revenue.
Thanks again, Tammy, for
Yes,
your patience. And I've been working closely with you, and
yes,
you're new to this role, so I very much appreciate the work you're doing. And I know how frustrating it is.
Yes.
A lot of those calls and meetings I've participated in, it's very difficult to deal with, and in this case, an agency that keeps moving the goalposts.
Yeah.
We started as a Medicaid service definition issue for funding, then became a behavioral health funding issue, and then became licensing.
correct.
And so, just to point out real quick, Brad Johnson, the corrections director, was out this week, but he did send Ken Pry, who's the jail administrator. So if there's any questions about the jail or anything that, we can certainly have him answer those questions. But going back to where this all kind of started, what has happened, and you did a very good job. There was a letter that came out a couple weeks ago that was from the director of Medicaid, behavioral health director, as well as regulation and licensure. And so kind of outlined where they were at.
Yeah.
And then in response, you sent a letter,
I did.
which I received a copy of.
Yes.
It was in my mailbox today. But in it, you outlined very thoroughly what the issues are, where the licensing issue got, somewhere along the lines, there's been a disconnect. And it really comes down to the interpretation of the regulations. And if you were to look at them, and Tammy and I have talked about it, to this point, there's always been an interpretation that there was an and.
Right. The regulations state that there are two scenarios in which you can use seclusion. One is, as it's outlined in a further subsection, which is where you're an accrediting agency and you follow all of those steps outlined by that accrediting agency in terms of a responsible use of seclusion only when absolutely necessary. The other scenario in which you can use seclusion is in civil protective custody. So we've always interpreted that as an or. You either follow these steps or it's in civil protective custody. When this discussion started, it appeared as they were interpreting that as an and statement, so that licensing was also telling us we needed to be accredited. And we said, you can't do both of those things. They don't coexist together in the rules. It's not how it works. So it does appear that they have verbally told us that they would interpret that as an or, but I have not yet received that in writing, so I'm not,
And so the issue is, and that's what concerns us, is that the fact that Douglas County still does not have a license.
correct.
And so the state is requiring them to go to this new service definition in order to get a license, and thereby getting accredited.
Yes,
And so, right now, to your point, Douglas County has been operating their civil protective custody unit without a license for several months,
correct.
probably 18 months or longer.
Close to that, yeah.
And so that's why when we keep have these conversations about why are we worried about the license? And it's really comes back to, we don't have to look very far to see what happens in Douglas County, which, I know, Tammy, we talked about the need to have a license.
Absolutely.
Because these individuals have health issues that need to be
Right.
monitored. And you need that medical staff. And it's gonna be a challenge if we don't have a license to be able to, provide that level of
Yes.
care.
Correct.
But to your point, Jane, yeah, and I've talked to, Brad about this a lot. There are jail standards that would cover, this type of service. And so, yeah, we could operate a civil protective custody unit out of the jail. But it would be staffed by the county, and it would fall under, not a license by the state, under HHS, it would fall under jail standards.
If I may, one quick question. What's your total budget, Tammy, at the bridge? Trying to relate this 100 to 150 to.
For
what that-
the program of civil protective custody, our expenses are about $675,000 for fiscal year 18.
So this could take 25% away.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And just to point out, this came up last week. So what happened was, starting July 1st of 2017 is when Medicaid stopped paying. And so that's the calendar year. But the state did allow, and we did it at the Region 5 Governing Board, we adjusted the contract with the bridge, and we essentially increased funding by $23,000. So through July 1 of 2017, the bridge has been made whole. And so this last year, July 1, 2017, through the end of June, behavioral health has been paying, and they've been drawing down the money monthly. That hasn't been the issue. But it's the Medicaid. There have been no additional payments to
Right.
cover Medicaid from July 1, continuing to today.
Yeah, our fiscal year is July through June.
And so when the state then came forward in the spring and said, the service definition needs to be resolved by July 1st, or else we will stop paying. And then it became you also need to have a license.
Yes.
Ms. Rabel?
So Todd and Tammy, that has been the same case, what you said for Douglas County. They have not been receiving any reimbursement from Medicaid,
Correct.
and they're operating without a license.
Correct, but I believe their commissioners have told them that they will not operate without a license after July 1, and if they cannot get their license by July 1, they will close their doors.
And so and it's important to note that Douglas County, Region 6, when Catholic Charities closed, they went out for an RFP, and Douglas County, proposed this, and the region approved it. And so Region 6 and Division of Behavioral Health, approved the contract, and then when they went to the regulation and licensure, their application for the license got denied. And again, it comes back to the interpretation of a new interpretation of the regulations.
Yes, the regulations have not changed since
There
2004.
have been no changes.
And with the Division of Behavioral Health regulations regarding funding, those regulations have not changed since 2014. There's been a new interpretation this year, I guess.
For our information purposes, just a moment, are there other testifiers or other people you want to relay information to us?
Well,
Or is this where we need to be and we just need to discuss this?
Well, I think the reason why we needed to have this conversation is, we've had these conversations in, I guess, different groups. The county board, we've talked about it several times. The Justice Council, we've talked about it. But I think the reason why, you know, I wanted to bring this forward to the common meeting was, and Tammy said this, and she's right, that we need to start a conversation about where we want to go. I mean, I think this is too important of a program to let it go away. Because, you know, this population, is vulnerable. I mean, they're, you know, and the three options that we've talked about, I mean, the alternatives are much worse than the current system we have in place. And so, we do have a CARF meeting, the accreditation agency's coming out in mid-June, in a couple weeks, to
Next
do a,
week.
you know, a
Yes.
site visit, and we can talk about these issues again, but, you know, the concern is that if we do adopt, and it really is up to Tammy and the bridge, you know, they're the contractor, you know, they're the ones that provide the service through the region, and, you know, they're the ones that really need to make that decision. But we need to also, I think, you know, have a role in that. And that's why, you know, we have law enforcement here, we have the county attorney, the city attorney. And so, yeah, if there's any questions or any, and, yeah.
If there's both funding and licensure problems, let's say the funding problems were taken care of, are we still held up by licensing problems? I mean, can you operate an unlicensed facility if you have the money to do it?
I will not operate an unlicensed
Okay.
facility. I just simply won't, knowing that our nursing staff is the team leader in that division. I'm not even sure I could find a nurse who would work in an unlicensed facility. So the license for me is a deal changer, yeah.
Tammy, do you remember, state also has passed legislation essentially decriminalizing
Yes,
public drunkenness.
yes,
And so in terms of a policy of state government, you know, that's something
yes.
that this is leading us in a completely different direction from how the state has said this is the way we should do things.
Absolutely. The state, I think, had a lot of foresight back in the late 70s when they decriminalized public intoxication. And it's certainly our belief that people who have addiction issues should not be criminalized for that. It's not what the criminal justice system is set up for. It doesn't provide the interventions. And that is how previously we were known as Cornhusker Place. That is why we were created back in the early 80s, was to run the civil protective custody program. And of course, we've now developed into a substance use treatment center with an entire continuum of care, which is, in our minds, how it should be. And we really view civil protective custody as that very first step. We've talked to clients who are in treatment today, who have had multiple stays in civil protective custody. And they will say, you know, wasn't the highlight of my time, but I was glad that you were there and you kept me safe until I was able to take care of myself. And that is essentially what that area is. But to think that a person who is so acutely intoxicated that we could have them in an environment where they were kind of interacting more as our residential treatment clients are, is just not realistic. We have too many scenarios where the clients are either angry and volatile towards the staff, also to each other. Sometimes they're also engaging in self-harm behaviors. And so there's just many cases where the person that we see under the influence is just a very different person than what we see maybe 10, 12, 14 hours later when their BAC is closer to 0. And so the thought that we would start with an unlocked door and then move them to seclusion if we had to just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense for this particular program.
Tammy, if I may, we've got a couple people want to speak. So you said 3 issues, but we've got overall your licensing. Is that correct?
Licensing is one issue.
Okay, and then you've got funding.
And then there's the funding issue, and there's 2 pieces, both Medicaid and the division.
Okay, just want to
Yes.
clarify. Okay,
Yeah.
and let's see, I believe Jane, Ms. Rabold's next. And
So
then-
Tammy, I don't know if you can address this question, or I don't know if someone in the audience might be able to address it, but really, who's driving these new interpretations? And I don't know if you can say what you think is the motivation behind driving these new interpretations when, I guess, shouldn't we all be on the same page about the outcomes we all hope to achieve in using the taxpayers' money the best way possible to achieve those outcomes?
You know, I honestly don't know what motivations are. I would assume most things are driven around funding these days. So I don't know if that's been the issue. I don't know regarding the new interpretation. I don't think that it started out as we need to close this program at the bridge. I think things snowballed as it started with Medicaid, and then with the situation in Omaha, I think things just snowballed. And, you know, here we are, and one of the things that I've been having, that I've repeated numerous times to the folks in the room from Health and Human Services is, who will serve these people? What will happen to them if this program cannot operate the way we're operating today? Where will they go, and is that a better solution? I am more than willing to relook at our policies and our procedures and make sure that we're doing things in the best possible way. I've never been opposed to change. I've only been at the bridge for about 3 months, so everything I get to see with a new lens, and the staff have been very accommodating as I ask a lot of questions about why we're doing things and why are we doing things and is this the best way. So I'm certainly not opposed to evaluating our programs, but I do not think that starting out with an unlocked door is possible with the number of clients that we serve and the acute level of BACs that they present.
Ms. Shore?
I don't know if this is a city law or county law decision, but if the entire issue is being determined by the language, whose obligation is it to interpret that for the state? I mean, is it a legal remedy? Is it, you know, the city or the county jointly filing suit against the state to, you know, have a judge interpret the language? What are the remedies? Because we're so unable to determine the motivation behind this new interpretation.
Right. I don't know if either one of the
Any,
city or county attorneys want to speak to that.
Jeff or Pat?
I would say that's certainly
Would you introduce yourself for
Jeff
our viewers?
Kirkpatrick, Lincoln City Attorney.
Thank you.
Pursuing a civil action, that's always an option. We haven't fully explored that yet. I think it's probably possible for the city and the county, along with the bridge, to file an action against the state to determine what the correct interpretation is. We haven't done that yet. Part of the reason I think we haven't done that is when you file suit, you make it more of a public confrontation, and we were hoping, including a number of people I know sitting around the table, were hoping to get this resolved. It's more of a common sense approach, saying, you know, this works well, this has been interpreted this way for a long time, why would you mess up something that's working so well? And if you go to court, then you're kind of drawing oftentimes battle lines, and it becomes more difficult to get something resolved. Maybe we're at the point where we need to start looking at that avenue.
right, I mean, I'm not speaking for any of my counterparts, but I think we're hearing a unified voice. I mean, we've got the whole room full, and if you're not with us, you can stand up at this time, but it's amazing to me that the community feels so strongly about this program that it might be our obligation to take that step.
Well, and part of the reason why we haven't yet, and I don't want to introduce Pat, but, you know, part of Tammy's frustration, I think yours as well, is we never got to the point where the state said, nope, we're not going to go along with you. It's always been, well, we're thinking about it, maybe off the record, you know, it's never been a situation where they said no, which, if they say no, then it's easier to say, okay, well, we'll see you in court. But if they say maybe, then you're a little
Or
more
what they
reluctant.
say in one meeting changes at the time we meet next, you know, and they say, oh, that person shouldn't have said that. This is our stance today. It's really hard to operate and move forward.
Pat Conn, County Attorney. I think it's important, and Ms. Rabel brought it up, and so did some others, that, we need to figure out who's to be talking to, and who we need to talk to with the state, with the region, and get those people together here before we do, push forward on any suits. Let's figure out who we need to have, talk with Tammy, I think she has some people coming out, get together with them and say, okay, where is the problem here? We've got these letters going back and forth, let's narrow the issue, what's the problem, and how can we correct that? And let's try to move forward. Now, I know we have some timelines that are coming up that we have to deal with, but I think as long as everybody knows what those timelines are, let's figure out who we need to talk to, and let's try to do this in a fashion that everybody, everybody knows who's talking and what the problem is, and get a specific question and answer.
If I'm just gonna insert, if we get into litigation, I mean, we're not gonna get something resolved for 6 months to a year, so we're here to under 30 days until July 1st.
Well, maybe, I mean, if we got a temporary restraining order, it's always possible you can get the court to give us something in the meantime. But again, once you go to court, then you're
It's an
looking for.
adversarial type here.
Yeah.
Ms. Lamb?
Yeah, so Tammy, thanks very much for all the work you're doing. Can you tell me, you had mentioned that you thought probably your service would be scaled back to 25%, and that, I know that's an estimate.
Yes,
Can you
it
tell
is.
us in terms of numbers, how many people are we talking about in that other 75% in an
Yeah.
annual basis?
For fiscal year 18, which would be July 1 through June 3rd, we expect to serve about 3,800 or have about 3,800 admissions. So number of individuals is less than that because some are repeat admissions. But 37 to 3,800 admissions per year in this program.
Mr. Wilchin?
Okay, so to Pat's point, and really quick, we talked about the new service model, which,
Yes.
To get accredited, and
Yes.
maybe you could speak to your research, because you have identified other programs in the country,
We have,
but not to the level of
no.
care that we provide.
No, and not with the model that we serve all. And that is what has always been important to me and to our staff, is that we serve everybody who would be brought in by law enforcement. The programs that we researched across the country, if they served all, they did not have the accreditation requirement. For the programs that were accredited, that we found, they had very limited admission criteria. So they were serving just a portion of who, we serve today.
And those individuals are not there. Technically, they're there involuntary, but
Yes.
at any time they want to leave, the door is unlocked.
Yes.
And they can leave.
Yeah, that, how their system is set up is that while the clients are not locked into a treatment room, the staff is locked behind doors. And if somebody starts to become very volatile, they push a button, the door opens, and they walk out, which that isn't the definition of civil protective custody as we employ it today.
Well, and so I think that's why I think it's important to have this conversation, is determine, what we want as a community. Do we want to continue to operate the civil protective custody as we currently do it? And then if the licensing becomes an issue, that we're prepared to support the bridge, and fight for that service?
Yep.
Or, and if we go down the other path, which is what the state has asked us to do, asked the bridge to do, you would be limiting the people you serve.
We would, and our concern too is that the program costs would be so much higher. In order to have, I typically have one nurse and one tech on staff. On game day Saturdays, weekends, we will sometimes pull down a tech from our residential, so sometimes we'll have one nurse and two techs running that program. If we have a situation where the doors are unlocked, I know Omaha has already quoted received quotes for 24/7 security. It's challenging to find nurses that will work in civil protective custody because of the clients that we work with. I can only imagine if the risk goes up. I think it would be only more difficult for me to find nurses and recovery advocates who are willing to work in that environment. So we would have to be looking at the remodeling of that program. We would have to look at 24/7 security. We would have to look at training, additional training, potentially on how to do takedowns and things like that. So who would pay for all of that? Certainly as a private nonprofit, this program already operates at a loss, just so you know. Our expenses are $675,000. In fiscal year 18, we received $563,000 in funding from the region, the city, the UNL contract, client fees, and emergency protective custodies. We have to make up the difference in fundraising. And so it already operates at a loss. To add $300,000 a year just on private security, let alone the remodeling, and then in the end, serve maybe 25% of who we're serving, doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to us.
So I know we've focused a lot on the clients
Yes.
and the better outcomes by having them taken to the bridge, but the added cost for law enforcement is something that, I mean, I know Jeff and the sheriff and deputy sheriff and the chief of UNL Police Department's here, but, I mean, the interaction that law enforcement have with these people, you know, would be very, they would drastically change if we adopt a new model, because those highly intoxicated, combative, and uncooperative people, I mean, yeah, their option is jail.
And what's hard, I think, for folks to understand, unless you've had a lot of experience with this population, is that somebody who may present cooperative and 6 hours later, for whatever reason, may not be cooperative. Likewise, somebody may come in with a police officer and act very cooperative, and as soon as the police officer leaves, then they become very angry. Or honestly, in the situation of, we've had somebody ask for a sandwich, our policy is that we do not provide any food unless they're 0.25 or lower to ensure that there's not a choking hazard. And so we've had somebody be perfectly compliant until we refuse a sandwich, and they get incredibly angry at that point. So the issue is that their behavior is so unpredictable.
We have 15 minutes left in this time period, and I don't know if we want to hear from one of the three law enforcement divisions, and then also if within that time, if we can come up with some sort of a action plan. So with Chief Blymeister, you're handy here, the sheriff, UNL police, just to maybe give us a synopsis here of your thoughts and the impact on the police officers, your police force, and you get Friday and Saturdays, I'm sure, are the heavy times. If you had to have an officer stay there by the room, if it's unlocked, that takes an individual out of service, maybe two.
Absolutely. So I'll just touch base.
And
First
why don't
off,
you introduce yourself?
Jeff Blymeister with the Lincoln Police Department. I want to thank Tammy and her staff for their continuing leadership and optimism throughout this 18-month process. And Tammy in particular, she took over for Phil with her eyes wide open, knowing that this was an issue. So great job.
Thank you.
To put it in perspective, and we've met many, many times in advance of this, of the 3,800 admits that Tammy's referring to, about 90% of those come from actions by Lincoln police officers. We'll put it in another context. 1,400 of those had a BAC of 2.5 or greater. In the most extreme of circumstances, where if Tammy and the bridge are forced to close their doors, 1,400 individuals that would go to jail will have to be first transported by our officers, handcuffed in the back seat of a cruiser, to Bryan West for a fit for confinement, which costs all of you and the citizens money to do that analysis. But more importantly, it takes an already stretched workforce down even lower. 1,400 times we're going to be sitting at the hospital waiting as Dr. Malenik, and Bryan are tremendous partners to this community. And they'll do what they can to expedite that. But that will be a severe change in operations and practices. And then, of course, the other alternatives that Carl kind of made reference to is, are there going to be conscious choices to not take some type of action based upon how arduous a task this is? And that will lead to increased victimization for a very vulnerable community, and undoubtedly greater where people commit crimes.
Yeah.
So this is a preventative model that also changes the course of a life. It may not be the first time,
Right.
but it could be the 5th time,
Yeah.
and it does make an impact.
It does.
And I also
Thank you.
too, during the infancy of these discussions, 18 months ago, Chief Yardley, who's here, and we recognized that there was a funding shortfall because then we were just talking about the Medicaid reimbursement and the uncertainty of the region providing that. And UNL entered into a contract with the bridge
We did.
and showed leadership there, and again, our agency did too by committing about
We did.
$50,000
Yes,
to make up those shortfalls.
yes.
But again,
Tremendously helpful. Yes, thank you.
Are there any other law enforcement thoughts that want to be injected? Sheriff Wagner?
Terry Wagner, Lancaster County Sheriff. I just wanted to bring up that some of those people that we pick up on mental health warrants or pick up on emergency police committal because of their mental health issues, if their BAC is of a certain level, the crisis center won't take them, so they go to the bridge until they're below that .25 threshold and then can be transferred. So, and I don't have any numbers on how many people that might be.
That would be about 125 a year.
Okay. So,
and to put that in context, I was looking around for Scott. Scott is not here, Everton. I'm pretty sure that there's roughly 400 EPCs on an annual basis, at least from Lancaster County. And so 125 of those is going to be
big number.
impactful.
Yeah.
And the other issue then is if the process is so arduous, I think it's not gonna be a big stretch for the intoxicated person to shove a police officer that normally would go to detox, is now gonna go to jail for assaulting the officer. So I think I think those are the consequences of making the process more difficult. You know, I was around and I'm probably the only officer in the room that has arrested somebody for public intoxication when it was illegal. And public intoxicants went to jail until '78, until that was, it was decriminalized. But yeah, I mean, a lot of folks went to jail for public intoxication, and it would be a huge number now.
Just for everyone's benefit, would you define EPC, Chief Blymister?
That is emergency protective custody, different than civil protective custody. Emergency protective custody has to do with mental illness. Oftentimes there is a substance abuse component intertwined into that. So this is a great partnership with the bridge because Tammy's staff are trained and that's their experience in dealing with that particular population. And it alleviates some of the pressure on Scott Etherton and his staff who, as a matter of routine, are operating at or near capacity.
Yes.
And if I'm right, I think it's about $400 a day to have them in our emergency protective custody.
And so they do stay with us for that short amount of time while they are under the influence. And then we contact Scott, Dr. Danny, and have them come down. And once that, the substances have left their system, then they are able to go back to the crisis center or wherever the next step is for that particular person. So those beds are at risk of this as well, which would be about 125 a year.
Okay, with our 10 minutes remaining, can we perhaps together develop an action plan? And I look at the county board because you've been dealing with this. It sounds like there's been, as well as the bridge and police, this has been going on for at least 18 months or more. What can we do here to resolve this?
So, yeah, I serve on the governing board for Region 5, and I've, obviously the Justice Council, and I've been involved. I mean, I think it's important that we as a community demonstrate that, and the county board and the city council demonstrate that we're willing to support the bridge to continue the current service that they provide. Because, you know, again, the alternatives are so much worse and so much more expensive. And so, while I would like to think that the State Division of Regulation and Licensure would issue a license in September when the bridge's license is up for renewal, I mean, I have no confidence in that, again, because they continue to deny the same license to Douglas County. So, I mean, I think what we need to do is we need to demonstrate our support for the bridge and communicate with the state that we are supportive of the bridge. And we may make the case that the services that they provide are invaluable to our community. And that any decision otherwise would be.
Is that a letter signed by all of us?
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly be willing to draft a letter. anyone's willing to sign it, they can certainly sign it. And I would send it to the governor, because ultimately that's where the decision needs to be made. Because we have been working with the division directors to this point, and we've not had really any successful outcomes.
Okay,
Well, I
Ms.
think,
Robinson?
there could be strength in numbers too, if we would want to join with Douglas County. And, I mean, they've got an issue there in their county too, and if we could jointly work together, or if they could also send one to the governor.
Well, and we are, so.
Oh,
in our-
okay.
In our conversations, I did include Mary Ann Borgeson.
Okay.
Who's the former chair of the
Yeah,
county
sure.
board, and she's on Region 6 governing board. Their issues are very similar, but they're somewhat different because they don't have a license, and their issue really is, it comes to everything. It's not just the license, it's funding for them. Their issue is that, and their city and their county government
But
don't
where is
cooperate like ours.
Is there a commonality in some?
It's similar, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I've been communicating with Mary Ann. She knows everything that's gone on. She'll be involved in the CARF. Originally, what we were told was the state told us not to involve Douglas County in these conversations, and I ignored that direction, and I included.
Yeah.
And so I thought it was important that they be involved because you're dealing with the two most populated cities and counties on the state, and our populations are so different than the rest of the state. Like I said, and it comes back to, in most counties, what happens is, these intoxicated individuals will go to the jail, or they'll go to the police station. But you're dealing with 1 or 2 people a week. We have dozens over a course of a weekend. And so we just don't have the capability to, Chief Blymeisters and Wagner's concerns is the volume. We don't have the ability to manage that population any other way.
Mr. Avery?
It seems to me that we're dancing around the real issue, and that is an unwillingness on the part of the state to fulfill our obligation. And frankly, I can see that this might be a deliberate policy to force this issue down to the county level so that we pay for it, or we lose the service. I don't know to whom I am speaking, but if you're in this room, I don't like it, and I know a lot of other people who don't.
Should we send you back to the big house up the street? Okay, Ms. Raybold and then Mr. Egan.
Well, I think Bill summed it up quite well, because we have demonstrated, we have a willingness, we see the tremendous value it provides those in our community. The state will say, great,
You
we
pay
agree.
for it.
Yeah,
Do it.
you pay for it. And so this sort of perpetuates a lot of the angst that we have about unfunded mandates, that they're willing to shift the cost to the counties and the municipalities to pay for this, what we consider an invaluable service, because it protects people, it better utilizes law enforcement in the appropriate fashion, but we care about the vulnerable people in our community. You would think that that would be the same sentiment in our state of Nebraska, that we care about all the vulnerable people in our community, and we'll make sure that the right municipalities and the counties are the ones that are holding the bill for it. That's what it smacks of,
Thank you. Mr.
on
Egan?
its face value.
We can't legislate to the national accrediting agencies that they accredit, but listening to former Senator Bill Avery, I think there could be some legislative solutions to it, to be a second part of the strategy, to mandate that civil protective custody can be licensed to Substance Abuse Treatment Center, and basically have the legislature tell the Behavioral Health Department, yes, you will license this.
And that will
yes.
reveal who is opposing it and who may be blocking the road.
That's right.
Introduce yourself again.
My name is Kerry Egan, I'm the Chief Administrative Officer for the Lancaster County Board.
Thank you.
So Carrie, when was the last time that we had to do something like that? Was it on jail reimbursement, or the reduction in state aid to cities and counties, or?
Well, we really had no legislative solutions on that because of the way those statutes were written at the time with the budget cuts. That was discretionary funding on both those issues. So we haven't been to the legislature on this particular issue, and originally I thought there was no legislative solution, but there possibly could be with regard to the licensure and perhaps with the behavioral health funding. Medicaid, maybe not. Maybe you have to meet a service definition that we're just not going to meet because there's other players involved. But I think those two components could possibly be a legislative proposal that would be helpful in the long run.
So Carrie, with the accreditation, then the health professionals would be able to continue to staff these facilities, right? They need
Well,
that
the accreditation
facility.
is a separate issue.
Yeah,
That
that
we
would
may
be the
have,
license.
yeah, we may have no control over that, but we can, in statute, mandate that this facility will be licensed to treat the civil protective custody type clients.
Okay, great.
Ms. Gaylor Baird?
I was going to address the licensing issue because if, you know, whatever happens with the funding, she's not gonna operate if she doesn't have a license. So Carrie's proposed potentially a legislative solution, but I expect that has a timeframe that doesn't meet our situation. What happens in the interim? How do we address the lack of license in the meantime? I mean, or.
When will we know about the license?
What is the?
Well, our license expires at the end of September, and what typically happens is, early to mid-August, we will get a statement. Early to mid-August, we will get a statement, and we fill out a form saying that we want to be licensed for this many beds, and we write a check, and they typically mail us a license within the month. That is how it has happened for a number of years. Last week, I did receive a letter from Health and Human Services, and it states on the letter that they are eager to work with us on the licensing issue. So I am very excited about that, but I have concerns about what they are not saying in the letter. They are implying in the letter that we are not in compliance by stating that they need to review our policies, and once we've had a chance to implement changes, then we would work together towards a license. My question to them was, and as Todd referenced, I mailed a response last week, and Late Likely probably got it today. And that was to specifically state exactly what are your concerns. Licensure was on site in 2011, reviewed our operations, provided no findings in regard to seclusion. They did make some recommendations in terms of the care that we provide during that program. We implemented all of those recommendations, and they gave us our license, and they licensed us every year since then. So our concern is, or our question is, what's changed? Because certainly the letter implies that we're not in compliance today, but they did not spell out why. So my response to them this week is, please tell us. We invited licensure in an effort to be transparent. We invited them on site May 3rd. We provided them all of our program narrative, all of our procedures. We gave them a tour. We talked to them about who we serve in here, and we have yet to receive a response, and that was May 3rd. So time is ticking, and we feel like we've been very transparent, very proactive in inviting them on, very willing to meet with them and talk with them, and yet it continues to drag out, knowing that our license will expire at the end of September.
Appreciate your preventiveness, thinking ahead. Mr. Shope, you had a comment?
My questions were answered, thank you.
What I'd like to do is, with my power here on this board, is maybe suggest that we let Mr. Wilgen from the county board, since you've been dealing with it, you're on Region 5, Tammy, of course, with your position there at Bridge, and I'd say Mr. Egan was the chief administrator for the county and the various things. If the three of you could head this, I think I could probably also speak on behalf of my city council colleagues that we would be willing to sign a letter, and if there's more that you would ask of us, then we could consult among ourselves. But I do want to leave this with an action plan, and Mr. Eskridge?
I'd volunteer to assist them
Oh.
because I've been involved in some
Oh, pardon
discussions
me.
on this.
That'd be great,
as well.
then, so we have 4 people, the 4 horse people here.
Addressed to the governor with appropriate copies to the Division of Behavioral Health, HHS, and Douglas County as well.
Thank you. Any other suggestions? It's kind of a collective thing. I appreciate that, because we haven't
Well,
been.
I guess, Tammy, is there anything that you'd like us to do? I mean,
You know, I appreciate the support. I have, and I've told Phil Tegler this, that I have definitely been the beneficiary of his good work as well as my staff's good work. And I know that, that the reason why everybody has been so quick to step in and support the program is because of the work that has been done before my time. So I just appreciate your support, your willingness to kind of fight on our behalf, and more importantly, fight on behalf of our clients. because the clients that we serve in this program are a challenging bunch.
Well, with that, is there any other business to be brought forward here? Is there a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Call the roll, please.
Anderson?
Yes?
Wilchin?
Yes.
Avery?
Yes.
Shore?
Yes.
Camp?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Rabel?
Yes.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Taylor Bear?
Yes.
Stowe?
Yes.
We are adjourned, and thank you to all of you here in attendance.
10-minute break?